Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. We have a very special guest with us, a man that really knows a thing or two about China, has been writing about it for years. And, we have Mr. Gordon Chang, and some of his books are The Great U.S. China Tech War, Losing South Korea, The Coming Collapse of China, and other books. And thank you so much, Gordon, for being on. And I just want to mention what I see coming, and I'd like to hear what you have to say. One of my sayings is that the 20th century was the American century, and the 21st century is going to be the Chinese century. And the reason being is that the business of America has been war, and the business of China has been business. But I mean, you have a perspective of China, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about it.
I think that China has peaked. We're seeing this with, for instance, a slowing economy. Chinese economy is not growing nearly as fast as been reported, but even the reports are much slower than we've seen before. And China right now has a debt crisis, which it has no answer to. We had 2008 because we have a relatively free market. We allowed the markets to adjust. This wiped out a number of players, but it ended up we had a sounder economy and financial system going forward. China didn't do that. What China did was overstimulate its economy with the biggest expansion of debt in history. And now they're facing the debt and they've got to adjust it, and they cannot do it. So when you look at that, and you also have Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, has been attacking private business, attacking the markets. He believes in a state-dominated economy. He reveres Mao Zedong. He's going back to totalitarianism. This is just not a formula that's going to work in the 21st century.
I hear what you're saying, and they're now the housing boom was like nothing that anybody's ever seen in the history of the world. I mean, was it like 20 years they went from shanties to skyscrapers? And talking about was their debt to GDP ratio? It's around 300 or more.
Yeah, we don't know what it is. I think it's probably about 350. People have said more, people have said less. They've got a hidden debt problem, and that complicates calculations. Also, it complicates calculations. We just don't know what their GDP is. So this is, you put all those factors together, but it's high. And the point is that they do not have the means to settle it. A lot of people say, well, China doesn't have very much external debt, so this is not a big deal. And it's true, they don't have that much external debt compared to the size of their economy. But the history of financial crises say that the ones that are the most difficult to resolve is when a country owes money to itself. That's China. And the reason why these are more difficult to resolve is because you have to have difficult political decisions. Somebody in your country is really going to have to suffer. And that takes political will. And basically, Beijing doesn't have it right now. They've been kicking the can down the road, but now they've run out of road.
What do you think about their dual circulation policy?
Dual circulation, which is a phrase that Xi Jinping developed about, 18 months or so ago, really doesn't really mean very much. It says, well, we want a healthy domestic economy, and we also want a lot of exports. Well, yes, of course. I want to play in the NBA and I want to be a billionaire. But we are starting to see some very soft consumption numbers. So just to take an example, the China State Railways just reported that it's running 70% fewer trains.
Wow.
And that's a real indication that there are problems inside China. People aren't spending. People aren't spending because they're not optimistic. They're not optimistic because they can see all sorts of problems that are not just on the horizon, but are right there, right now.
The COVID war began, on Chinese Lunar New Year, the year of the rat, 2020. And now, of course, they're still shutting down they shut down the city of Wuhan, right?
Wuhan.
And then you look at what I used to be on Hong Kong TV when the protests were going on in 2019. And I'd ask the guys, we'd be on like 20 minutes and we'd take a break. And I say to the reporter, so what's going on? What do you got? Mr. Celente, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep fighting. We're not going to let them take us over. And you go back then to 2019 before the virus broke out. There were what? There was 7.5 million people in Hong Kong, and 1 million were taking to the streets. You can't get 1 million people out in the United States. What? 333 million people.
Right.
So this thing was really big. But then that virus broke out. They closed down a couple of cities. They closed down Hong Kong, put on the security law, and that was the end of that.
Yeah, well, in Hong Kong, you have an insurgency. And we know from the history of insurgencies that they can sort of disappear for times, but they eventually come back. So we had large protests in Hong Kong 2003, 2014, 2019. Right now, it looks very quiet. But you have real resentment at Chinese rule. And I don't know when we'll see protests again. But I believe that people in Hong Kong are going to fight. The other thing that's happening, if China doesn't, if China is successful in ending this insurgency, it's going to come at great cost because people are leaving. And we're seeing a loss of vibrancy in Hong Kong, which, by the way, right now is locked down to some extent because of the coronavirus. And Beijing is going to actually tighten that. But right now, this, I think, is not a good situation for China because they've destroyed a great city.
Looking at their economy and with the lockdowns going on and the zero policy, COVID policy, it's not going to come back in a much broader sense. And the people that have been so locked down and this mentality that's been set in, it's bigger than China. I'm noticing it in the United States too. I'm up here in Kingston, New York, and when I go out at night, the streets are dead. There's no nightlife anymore. I mean, I'm serious when I say that. The bars that used to be open till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, a lot of them are gone, and young people aren't. Diners, when we were young guys, they used to be open 24 hours a day. And now they're closing at 10 p.m. I'm saying this because I think the damage that has been done in China, as I'm listening to you, that the people have, they've just changed their mentality and their feelings, and they're really down about this. I was down in New York City and going 5:15 at night, rush hour, coming from here going south. Getting off the West Side Drive for 57th Street, I look across, and from 51st to 57th Street, going north, rush hour, not one car stopped in the middle for a red light. So what's going on here, the media's not talking about this. The business news isn't talking about this. And what you just said in China, and here, this is the front page of the New York Times, April 14th. China's zero COVID strategy shows perils of autocracy. So these people living under this autocratic regime, I don't think spending is going to come back.
It's going to take a really long time. And part of it is because, people spend when, for instance, their homes are worth a lot of money. What we're seeing in China right now is that property values are starting to come down. But what's even worse is that there are really very few sales. And the reason is that the difference between what people are willing to buy and what they're willing to sell at is too large. The market is frozen. We're looking at all sorts of metrics in terms of spending, and most of them are soft. Not all of them, but most of them are soft. And this is really before COVID in this most recent wave with, Jilin province, Shenzhen, now Shanghai. We're seeing a resurgence of this in Shenzhen again. where Guangzhou, the capital of Guangdong province, is now in a semi-lockdown. So Beijing right now doesn't have a defense to this disease. And until it does, you're not going to have resumption of consumption. That's not a China phenomena. That's a phenomena we've seen around the world, including, as you just pointed out, very much so in our country.
On the Ukraine front, there's a lot of criticism that China will not take a position on this. And yesterday, Janet Yellen, or Wednesday, Janet Yellen came out and called on China to help end the Russian conflict. And she warned that China will face a loss of standing in the world if they don't unite with the United States and NATO. And then I went to Global Times, and their headline, that's of course the Chinese paper, "No way Yellen can scare China into changing stance on Ukraine issue." So what's your take on this?
Well, Janet Yellen's Atlantic Council speech was really meant to convey the administration's position. But what she did was she repeated a position that we heard, for instance, from Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, from Biden himself. And until the United States imposes sanctions on China for supporting the Russian war effort, Global Times is right. Beijing will not be intimidated. We have seen over the last several months, first of all, Beijing greenlighted the invasion on February 4th when Vladimir Putin was in Beijing. There was the issuance of that 5,000-word joint statement, which talked about the No Limits partnership. Then, after the invasion, China was supporting the Russian war effort with elevated commodity purchases, with making its financial system available to sanctioned Russian institutions, by supporting the Russian narratives with their propaganda machine in China. So basically, Beijing has been behind this. The one thing that we've noticed recently, and this is like the last 2 weeks, China has backed off from a number of things. And I think that's because they're worried what the Biden administration will do. So for instance, Huawei Technologies, which is essentially controlled by the Chinese military, they've closed their offices in Russia. Although China is honoring existing commodity purchase contracts, it appears that they're not buying oil for May loadings, which is an indication that the Biden administration has talked to China. But from a rhetorical point of view, Beijing is now more fully behind Russia than it's ever been.
And then I'd like to ask you this question. Do you think that China will take over Taiwan?
That deserves a long answer. I don't see an invasion this year. And the reason is that Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, is involved in a very intense political struggle. He wants a precedent-breaking third term as General Secretary of the Communist Party. That will be decided at the 20th National Congress this fall, if tradition holds. So I don't see anything happening this year. There are a lot of reasons, Gerald, why China would not invade Taiwan, but these are logical reasons. And as we've seen with regard to Ukraine, logic doesn't always govern world events. So I'm really concerned that China will try something with regard to Taiwan. The other thing I'm concerned about, it's not just Taiwan, it's Japan, the Philippines, India. These are places where China has been engaging in provocative behavior. Those could spiral out of control. And just one other thing that we don't talk about very often, and that is that you have China challenging the US Navy and the US Air Force in the global commons. One of those incidents could spiral out of control, as it almost did on April 1st, 2001, when a Chinese jet clipped the wing of a US Navy EP-3. So there are a lot of reasons why this could really end up in a place where none of us really anticipates.
Wow. Yeah, I see. It's a dangerous future out there. The way they asked Albert Einstein what kind of weapons will be used to fight World War III. He said, "I don't know." He said, "But they'll be using sticks and stones to fight the fourth."
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
nobody talks about peace. By the way, I might get censored for saying that. It's that's just more and more and more and more in conflict. If we don't, I'm concerned anyway, as somebody that tries to look into the future as you do. And I want to thank you so much for the knowledge and information you have. I mean, it's first rate that I've never heard before. It's really sensational things that you're saying, the data that you have, and the information that you provide. So thank you so much, and wishing you all the best. And I'd love to do it again sometime.
Thank you very much, Gerald. And I would love to do it again. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.